In this video, we will create a game over menu for our game, so when our player collides with the boulder, a game over screen appears and we can press the restart button to restart the scene and reset our score. So to create a game over menu, we want to make sure that we have three things. We want to have a screen which shows game over. We want to make sure to pause the game so the player can no longer move and the score can no longer increase. And then finally, we want to add an option to restart the game. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our canvas object in our hierarchy. We're going to right click on this, go to UI, and then create a panel. This will become a child game object with the canvas as the parent. And let's just rename this to game over screen. Now you can see if you head to your game tab in the Unity editor, there's this sort of foggy layer on the game now. This is your panel. You might be able to see it here in the scene view as well. It's of course completely up to you how you want your game over screen to look. I like mine to be a bit darker than the game view and I like to make it a bit transparent. I will go to the color property here in the image component of my game over screen. I will set it to black, and then using this slider at the bottom, I can decide which level of transparency I would like on my game over screen. And if we drag our slider all the way to the right, the screen will be completely blackened. If we slide it all the way to the left, this is how a game normally looks. I would like to just make it a bit darker, so I think I'll keep my transparency level around 80. Now that we have our game over screen, we would like to place some text and a button on it. So we're going to right click on our game over screen in the hierarchy. I'm going to go to UI again. I'm going to choose the text mesh pro element. I'll just rename this to game over text. And then in the inspector on the right, I'll change my text to be game over. Don't worry about the placement of the text for now. We'll get to that later. Now I will add my button. So I will go to my game over screen once again, right click, go to UI, and then you can see we have an option here called Button Text Mesh Pro. This button will be used to restart the game. So I will call it Restart Button. And you can see you can expand this button because you actually have a text element underneath it. So I will change the button text to be Restart. So now when we run our game, we have our text and we have our button. It's weirdly placed and nothing works. So let's try to fix that. To give some functionality to a game over screen, we would need what is called a game manager. Basically a game object which handles the state of the game. So I will go to my hierarchy. I will right click and I will create an empty game object. I will name this game manager, and then I will go to my scripts folder and create a new model behavior script, and I will also call this game manager. Again, remember your naming of the objects in the scripts do not matter. This is just how I like to name my objects. But before we start editing the script, let's just have a think about what we want to do. Firstly, we want to make sure that the game over screen is hidden, so this does not show up instantly when you play the game. Then we want to make sure to stop the time, so the game pauses and the score can't increase anymore. And then we want to have an option to restart the game. So let's start with the first one, game over screen is hidden. To make sure something is hidden in the game, we want to make it inactive. If you watched my earlier videos, I talked about enabling and disabling something, making it either active or inactive. You can do this by going to any game object in your hierarchy, then tick or untick this box. So now it is inactive, now it is active. Let me just show you in the game view real quick. Now when I untick this box, our player disappears because it is now inactive. It can't interfere with anything else in the game and it will be invisible. But when I make it active again, it is again visible. So we actually want to do the same thing for our game over screen. We want to untick this box. So now our game over screen is invisible when you start the game. But let's just say for whatever reason, we forgot to set the game object as inactive in our editor. We want to make sure that it's still set as inactive in our script. So to set it as inactive, first we need to access the game over screen. For this, I will create a serialized field. It will be a private game object, and I will just name it our game over screen. Now, if I wanted to set this to active instead of inactive, what I would do is access our game over screen variable, and I would use the period sign to access the extension methods. And there's this method called setActive. As you can see, it activates or deactivates the game object according to the value of the supplied parameter. What is the parameter we need? We need a bool. So if I wanted to set it to being active in the parameters, I would put true. So here comes a challenge for you. Instead of setting this to be active, we want to set the game over screen to be inactive. You can go ahead and pause the video now, give this a good go, and then come back to see my solution. It's fairly simple, really. The only thing we actually got to do is to change this from true to false. So now when we start a game, this is inactive. Just to show you this actually works, I will save my script. I will reactivate my game over screen game object in the hierarchy. And then of course, we also need to go to our game manager and then attach our game manager script to this as a component. And it takes in a game object, game over screen. We would need to drag our game over screen here into the inspector. So now before I run the game, you can see that the game over text and a restart button is visible on screen, and this checkbox is ticked, but when I run the game, text disappears, this goes unticked. So now we know that this line works, and if we accidentally forgot to deactivate our game over screen in the inspector, then the script would make sure to deactivate the game over screen. Now that this part is out of the way, we actually need to add an extra part, which is reactivate our game over screen. Because right now it is invisible, but we need to activate it again when we get the game over. I will actually not be using the update method for this script, so I will be deleting it. And now we can create our next method, which will be a public method. It will have the return type void, and I will name this trigger game over. So in here, we need to reactivate our game over screen, and we need to stop the time. So the next challenge for you is to reactivate our screen. Pause the video, give this a good go, and then come back to see my solution. What we want to do is just access our game over screen variable once again, use the set active method, and this time we want to set it to true. So now that this is reactivated, we want to pause the time. We can do this by accessing the class called time, and we will use the variable called timescale. So we can read from the description here, the scale at which time passes, and it takes in a float. When your game runs at normal speed, this float is set to 1f. So to pause the game, we just need to set it to 0f. So I will set it equal to 0f. Now, when trigger game over is called, the time stops and the game can continue. So now we actually have these two out of the way as well. Now the last thing we need to do in the script is restart the game. So I will create another public void method, and I will call this restart game. So when we want to restart our game, we want to reset our timescale, and we want to reload the current scene. Resetting the timescale will be the next challenge for you. If you remember, up here we set it to 0f, and by default, the timescale is set to 1f. So pause the video, give this a good go, and then come back to see my solution. So to reset the timescale, we just need to set it back to what the original value was. So to do this, we will once again access the time class, then the timescale variable, and this time we will set it to be equal to 1f. Now our timescale is reset, and now we need to reload the current scene. With our current usings using Unity Engine, we don't have the tools in our toolbox to do that, so we need to add some more tools. We will this time be using the Unity Engine scene management. So as the name states, this is for managing scenes, loading, reloading, skipping to the next scene, etc. So now we can go back to a restart game method, and we can access the scene manager. We will use the method load scene. Loads the scene by its name or index in build settings. So let's just quickly cover what are the build settings. If you go back to the Unity editor, go to File, you can see what is called build profiles. This is build settings. We'll open this up, and you can see here we have something called a scene list. Right now we've only added our sample scene. So we have our scenes folder and the name of the scene called sample scene, and this has the number 0. So this is the index of all the scenes we have in our game. And if we go back to the Unity editor, we can see here in our hierarchy that we are currently in the sample scene. So this checks out with the scene list that we have in our build profiles. So in short, this is normally where you would add multiple levels to your game, but in this game we will only have one level. So we will just stick to the original scene list with the sample scene as the only one, head back into Visual Studio. And now for the parameters, we could choose to add a string with the scene name, so sample scene. We could choose to add an integer, which would be our index for the scene. As you saw before, our index was 0. But since we only have one scene, it would make more sense to make sure that this is the only scene we want to load. So instead of using the scene name or the index for our scene, we will be using the scene manager get active scene. So this, as the name states, gets the active scene, so the scene we're currently in. Remember parentheses because this is a method. And then we will use an extension method. So name. Save this script, go back into the Unity editor, and when we run our game, nothing actually happens. Now, why is that? That is because we haven't told the game explicitly when to actually call the trigger game over method. So we need to do that someplace in our game. So let's just have a quick think about when do we actually want to trigger the game over screen. Well, we want to do that when the player and the enemy collides. The place where we handle this in our game is in the collision handler script. So this if statement checks if our player collides with our boulder. So when the player and the boulder collides, we want to find the game manager and then call the trigger game over method. In an earlier video of this series, we used the boulder behavior script to find the score manager and then call the method add score. So we will be doing the same this time. We will be typing object.find first object by type. Which type of object do we want to find? We want to find our game manager. And then we want to use the extension method, which is trigger game over. So let's try and save this script. And now when we run a game, you can see the game over screen is inactive. Our score increases each time the boulder respawns, but when we collide with our boulder, the time is stopped, the boulder stops moving, our score no longer increases, and our game over screen is shown. But the placement of our text and our button is still a bit off, and when we try to press our restart button, nothing actually happens. So let's just firstly get the placement of our text and our button correct. I will go to my game over text. I will be repositioning my text object by going down in the inspector and then setting the alignment to being center. And I will just move it up a bit. I'd also like to increase my font size a bit. And now I can reposition my button. I'll go to my button game object in my hierarchy and I'll just move it a bit downwards. And then I'll just scale it up a bit. So to make sure I don't have to edit each one of these boxes, I'll just hit this little link icon, and this will make sure that when I edit one axis on my scale, it will edit all of them. So yeah, I'm happy with that. That looks pretty good. Now that we've gotten our placement correct, we need to make sure that the button actually does something. And this is the reason why we've set our method restart game to be public. This is so that the method could be called by pushing a button. And you can see if you scroll down in the inspector, there's this on click component. So this is a list of the events which happens when we click a button. We will hit the plus sign to add a new event. And in here, we need a game object which contains the script or the method we want to use. So we will drag our game manager into this field. And now we can open up this drop down menu and we can go to our game manager script. And here you can see a long list of methods. And we actually have the method called restart game. So now when we run our game and the game over screen activates, we will hit the restart button and the game will restart. And you can actually see this works for the entire scene. So now our score is 2, but when we hit our restart button, the score is reset to 0. So that is actually our entire game loop. In the next video, we will be adding sprites and a background to make this game look a bit better, and we will also talk a bit about sprite manipulation. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more content, and thank you for watching.